Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to the mid-20th century when America was shiny, confident, and full of secrets. You're going to sink softly into the life of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a man born into glittering privilege, raised in the roaring 1920s, and destined to become both an icon and a tragedy. You'll walk through the marble halls of wealth, the whispering shadows of illness, and the fragile thread that tied it all together, ambition. You probably won't survive this kind of pressure, but don't worry, we're just here to listen, not to live it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let us see who else is still awake with you tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in Brookline, Massachusetts, 1917. The air smells faintly of polish and pipe smoke, the kind that clings to old libraries and mahogany desks. Baby Jack, as everyone calls him, arrives into a world already paved for success. His father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., is ritually rich-hand, already planning which son will run for president someday. You, hovering quietly in this nursery of destiny, might notice the soft tick of a clock beside the crib. Time, even then, feels impatient. But Jack's childhood isn't the perfect picture it looks like in the family albums. Behind the wealth sits fragility. The little boy is sycophant, bedridden, pale as candle wax, his back twisted by pain. Scarlet fever nearly kills him once. Later, doctors whisper about Addison's disease, a rare adrenal condition that leaves him weak and trembling. Historians still argue whether his illnesses made him humble or simply hardened his need to prove himself. As you float beside his bed, you can almost hear the rustle of pages. Jack reading endlessly, escaping into history books and stories of adventure. There's a quiet irony here. The future president, too frail to run outside, learns to fight battles in his mind first. Then there's the Kennedy clan itself, a sort of dynastic circus of confidence and chaos. Joe Sr. drills his children in winning not morality, just victory. Dinner conversations sound more like campaign strategy than family talk. Don't get mad, his father says. Get even. And you can imagine young Jack, spoon in hand, half listening, half dreaming of escape. The house is big, full of laughter and ambition, yet oddly cold. You sense that everyone is trying to impress someone else. The older brother, Joe Jr., is the golden child, the chosen one. Jack is the sickly shadow, clever but underestimated. It's a rivalry that will quietly shape history, because when Joe Jr. dies in World War II, the family crown passes, almost by accident, to the frail second son. For now, though, it's the 1930s. The Depression rages outside, but the Kennedys barely notice. They're sailing yachts while millions stand in bread lines. It's not that they're cruel, just cocooned. And as you float through their seaside estate in Hyannis Port, you see a young man smiling for photos. His hair perfect, his teeth bright, his back aching under a brace hidden beneath the suit. One quirky fact: Jack once kept a small notebook where he jotted random quotes he liked, anything from Winston Churchill to Greek philosophers. His handwriting was sharp, restless, impatient. You might picture him scribbling at midnight, lamp flickering, surrounded by the hum of privilege, yet haunted by the question of what any of it really means. There's something almost cinematic about his youth. He studies at Choate, a prep school for America's elite, and quickly becomes both popular and rebellious. He starts a prank club called the Muckers, basically to poke fun at the pompous teachers. You can almost hear the suppressed laughter echo through the dorm halls. Beneath the charm, though, there's that quiet loneliness, the same kind that follows every person who is expected to be exceptional. Historians still argue whether Jack's charm was natural or meticulously practiced. Some say he had that rare charisma that couldn't be taught. Others claim it was a mask he wore to hide pain. But either way, people noticed him. Even when he said little, rooms tilted toward his presence. The late 1930s bring him to Harvard, where he studies government and history. You drift through ivy-covered courtyards, hearing distant jazz from radios and the muffled chatter of students debating war in Europe. Jack writes his senior thesis on British appeasement of Hitler, later publishing it as a book titled Why England Slept. It becomes a modest success one that foreshadows his lifelong fascination with courage, leadership, and failure. Yet behind the polished intellect lies constant suffering, back pain, intestinal issues, mysterious fevers. His body is a battlefield, and still he smiles, flirts, and sails. There's something almost heroic in that duality, isn't there? You lying there, half asleep, might even relate, the daily pretending that everything is fine while quietly fighting your own unseen war. You sense destiny forming like a slow tide. Every weakness becomes a strange preparation for the spotlight. Every hospital stay, every quiet evening of reading adds layers to the man who will someday hold the nuclear codes. It's as if the universe is molding him through discomfort, training him to live with the unbearable, a small, forgotten detail. As a boy, Jack kept a pet canary. He once wrote to a friend that he liked the bird because it kept singing even when it didn't have to. That's Kennedy in one sentence. By the end of this first drift through his early years, you can feel the gentle hum of fate just under the surface. The young man who shouldn't have survived childhood is slowly being shaped into a symbol. And you, hovering over this candlelit world of privilege and pain, realize that greatness rarely begins with comfort. It starts with endurance. The kind of endurance that keeps you awake long after the lights are out, wondering what your story might become. You drift now into the 30s and 40s, when the Kennedy family becomes less of a household and more of an empire. You can almost feel the hum of their ambition through the polished floors of their Boston mansion, each child like a chess piece moved by their father's invisible hand. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., Jack's father, is a force of nature. Imagine a man who could charm Wall Street in the morning, Hollywood by afternoon, and the White House by night. He's tall, confident, terrifyingly practical. To him, morality is a tool useful when it wins elections, disposable when it doesn't. He teaches his sons that image is everything, and failure is worse than sin. You, half asleep, can hear his voice like a drumbeat echoing through the decades. Don't get caught. At family dinners, politics is the main course. The Kennedys don't eat quietly, they spar. Conversations overlap like waves. Joe Sr. quizzes his sons about world leaders, about Roosevelt's policies, about who's likely to run next year. Jack, pale but sharp, listens more than he speaks. His mother, Rose, insists on manners and faith, her rosary beads clinking softly in her hands, as though to balance her husband's ruthlessness. There's a strange duality. Hirtha, father chasing power, the mother chasing heaven. You can sense young Jack trapped in the middle, learning how to balance the two worlds, ambition and grace. Historians still argue whether Joe Sr. genuinely loved his children or merely treated them as investments. Maybe both. When he sent Joe Jr. to war, it wasn't just patriotism, it was branding. A Kennedy dying heroically would make the family name shine brighter. Jack feels that weight. Every report card, every speech, every photograph is compared to his brother's. And though Jack smiles, you can almost see the thought behind those cool gray eyes. What if I am not enough? It's a quiet pressure that never leaves him. Even when you imagine him lying in a hospital bed, back braced, ribs aching, he's probably planning how to look strong in the next photograph. A strange kind of performance, one he'll never escape. The Kennedy siblings formed their own microcosm, a world of laughter, teasing, and ruthless competition. There's Joe Jr., the golden son, Kathleen, the dazzling rebel, Eunice, fierce and disciplined, Rosemary, the fragile one, whose tragic fate after a failed lobotomy casts a long, silent shadow over the family. That's the part the public doesn't see. The cost of perfection is often hidden in quiet rooms, and Jack, always observing, learns something crucial. If you want to survive in a family of alphas, you master charm. You turn pain into wit. You become the boy who never seems angry, never seems weak, never reveals the depth of his exhaustion. One quirky little moment. At Harvard, Jack once bet a friend he could get through an entire formal dinner without saying anything intelligent. He succeeded, charmed everyone anyway. It's the perfect metaphor for his future politics. Talk little, smile more, make people feel good about themselves. By the late 1930s, Joe Sr. is appointed U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. You drift with the family to London, where the air smells of cigars and impending war. Jack becomes a quiet observer again, watching Britain's politicians try and fail to reason with Hitler. He visits Parliament, writes notes, and absorbs every ounce of the spectacle. His father, meanwhile, believes appeasement is the only way to protect America's business interests. The two men argue. Jack's mind begins to diverge from his father's iron pragmatism. Historians still debate whether this is when Jack's political philosophy truly forms, the mix of realism and idealism that will define his presidency. You can almost feel the tension as they walk the manicured embassy garden paths, father and son. Ambition versus conscience, both believing they're right. When war finally breaks out, London trembles. The Kennedys retreat home. But Jack carries something new inside him, a sense that the world can fall apart quickly, no matter how rich or powerful you are. Back in America, he's restless. Joe Jr. prepares for combat, fulfilling the father's dream. Jack, still battling his body, insists on joining the Navy anyway. Doctors protest. He charms them, bends the truth, and gets into something reckless about it, like a man trying to outrun fate. You can almost see him during those early training days, thin smiling, limping slightly, joking with the other men who have no idea that every step costs him pain. The Kennedy household buzzes with pride. Reporters start calling them America's royal family. Joe Sr. beams. He's already planning which son will become president after the war. Spoiler alert, he's betting on the wrong one. Rose Kennedy writes in her diary about the family dinners, how Jack always brings humor to the table, diffusing arguments with a joke or a teasing comment. Maybe that's his superpower, turning pressure into laughter, fear into ease. There's a moment historians love to mention. One evening, a friend asks Jack what he wants to be when he grows up. He grins and says, "I guess I'll be a politician. It's the best way to get girls." The friend laughs. Jack probably did too. But somewhere beneath that wit is an awareness he's being prepared for something enormous, whether he wants it or not. By the early 1940s, America inches toward war, and Jack's identity begins to crystallize. He's no longer the fragile son. He is the quiet observer who will soon be thrown into chaos and prove everyone wrong about his strength. You float out of the Kennedy house, hearing faint echoes of laughter, piano music, and the distant Atlantic waves. The family portrait smiles from the wall, every face confident, youthful, untouchable. But if you linger just a second longer, you'll notice Jack Sic, the only ones that seem to understand that everything golden eventually fades. You find yourself now drifting into the humid nights of the South Pacific, 1943. The air is thick with salt and diesel, and somewhere beyond the moonlit water, a small wooden boat hums quietly. PT boat, number 109, and there's Jack Kennedy, now Lieutenant Kennedy, slouched at the helm, his hairs a little longer, his smile the same, lazy but sharp, like someone who knows exactly how much charm to spend. The Pacific War feels endless. The Japanese Empire is pushing hard, and America's sending boys barely out of college into waters they can't pronounce. You can almost feel the vibration of the boat through your skin, the engine coughing, the smell of oil and damp rope filling the air. Historians still argue whether Kennedy ever truly wanted to be a soldier, or whether he simply couldn't stand the idea of being left behind. Maybe both. He wasn't built for war. His spine screamed in protest every time he moved. But there he is commanding men tougher, older, louder than he is. And somehow they listen. The PT boats were small, fast, and made of wood. Strange choice for a machine meant to fight destroyers. You might as well throw matchsticks at a tank, but that's what they had. Late one August night, in the dark waters around the Solomon Islands, Kennedy's boat was cut in two by a Japanese destroyer. It happens in seconds. One moment, calm, the next, fire. You can almost see the flash of metal, the shockwave of noise, the fragments of wood whirling through black water. Kennedy is thrown hard against the deck. Two of his men die instantly. The survivors, scattered and burned, call out for help. Now imagine the silence after, just the hiss of the sea swallowing the wreckage. And Kennedy injured, exhausted, calling out through the darkness, gathering whoever's left. He ties a strap from one wounded man's life vest between his teeth and starts swimming. Hours pass. The horizon doesn't move, but he keeps going. It's the kind of night you'd think a movie invented, except it's real. 7 miles of ocean, sharks circling, bodies trembling from exhaustion, and Jack, barely alive himself, hauls them toward a speck of land. They make it barely. For the next several days, they hide on a small island, surviving on coconuts and rainwater. Kennedy carves a rescue message onto a coconut shell coordinates, names, a desperate plea. A local scout delivers it. Eventually, they're rescued. That coconut shell, the same one, later sits on Kennedy's Oval Office desk as a paperweight. It's a strange symbol of his life, fragile, absurd, miraculous. Historians still debate how much of that story became legend. Some say the Navy exaggerated the heroics for morale. Others insist Kennedy's leadership saved those men. Either way, he walks away with a limp, a scar, and a reputation. And in that era, reputation means everything. When he returns home, the newspapers love him. Hero congressman material, they say. Joe Sr., ever the strategist, smells opportunity. The family machinery starts to hum again. Money, contacts, campaign planning. You can almost hear it, the sound of destiny being assembled piece by piece. But before the politics, there's a quieter moment worth noticing. Jack, recovering in a hospital bed, looks thin as a ghost. His back is wrecked, his hairline already receding a little. Nurses later recall how he kept making jokes about his injuries, about the food, about the absurdity of being called a hero when he just wanted to survive. One quirky detail: he kept that coconut shell for the rest of his life. It wasn't polished or framed, just sat there, rough and ordinary, like a reminder that even heroes are mostly lucky survivors. You can almost picture him tracing its surface during late-night Oval Office calls, feeling the grooves that once meant life or death. Back in Massachusetts, the Kennedys treat Jack's survival like divine proof that the family is destined for greatness. Joe Sr. sees a new star to polish. Jack, ever the reluctant prince, agrees to run for Congress, mostly to stop his father's nagging. But something has shifted. The sickly boy, the forgotten second son, has now lived through fire and salt water. There's a glimmer in his demeanor, quiet knowing that nothing in politics will ever be as terrifying as that night in the Pacific. Historians still argue whether the PT-109 incident shaped Kennedy's later decisions, especially during crises like Cuba or Berlin. Maybe it did. Once you've nearly drowned under a moonless sky, nuclear brinkmanship probably feels almost manageable. As you float through this part of his story, the line between myth and man blurs beautifully. There's a cinematic rhythm to it, the survivor returning home, the reluctant hero preparing to face a new battlefield, Washington. But beneath the glamour, the pain never leaves. His spine, shattered and fused, keeps him in agony for decades. He wears a corset under his suits. He walks stiffly, his gait measured and deliberate, hiding constant pain. You'd never guess it from the photos, the grin, the confidence, but every step is work. There's a strange comfort in that thought, isn't there? The idea that behind every icon, there's just a tired person pretending to be invincible. It makes him more human, more real. Before you drift off, imagine the island again. The waves soft, the moon high, the sound of palms rustling over exhausted men. Kennedy, lying there, half dead, half live, staring at the stars, probably wondering why he survived. Maybe that's where the idea of destiny begins, not in ambition, but in bewilderment. He'll carry that feeling all the way to the White House, though he doesn't know it yet. For now, he just closes his eyes and listens to the ocean breathe. You drift now into the smoke-filled air of post-war America late 1940s. Early 1950s, where the sound of campaign rallies blends with the hum of televisions and the clatter of typewriters. Jack Kennedy, the war hero, the handsome survivor of PT 109, has traded his Navy uniform for a suit that never quite fits his back brace. He's still thin, still smiling, still pretending he's fine. Politics is changing. The country, bruised but victorious, wants optimism and television. That glowing new oracle in the corner of every living room has started deciding who looks trustworthy. You can almost see the flicker of the screen, black and white static, perfect hair, white teeth. America is falling in love with images, and Kennedy, more than anyone, understands the power of looking like hope. Historians still argue whether he entered politics because he wanted to make a difference or because his father needed a new project after losing Joe Jr., maybe both. But the moment Jack announces his run for Congress in 1946, something shifts. He's awkward at first, too quiet, too cerebral. Yet when he steps into a room, people feel lighter. There's that charm again, the easy grin that says, "Don't worry, I get it." You can picture him shaking hands at a fish market in Boston's salt air, gulls screaming, old fishermen smiling despite themselves. He listens, really listens, even when he doesn't have answers. One of his aides later said, "He made you feel like you were the only person in the world." Not bad for a man who could barely stand up straight without painkillers. His mother Rose prays constantly for him. His father quietly funds everything: flyers, cars, radio time. The Kennedys run campaigns like military operations. You can almost hear the phones ringing, the typewriters hammering out slogans. The new generation offers a leader. It sounds like a prophecy whispered through static. By 1947, Jack wins. Congressman Kennedy, just 29 years old, sworn in, hair gleaming under the Capitol lights. You drift through the marble corridors of Washington, feeling the tension between old men in gray suits and this young, suntanned aristocrat who looks like he belongs on a yacht. But behind the scenes, Jack is miserable. His health is deteriorating again. Addison's disease gnaws at his body. He spends long nights with fevers and tremors, reading reports by lamplight, pretending he's fine. His sister Kathleen dies in a plane crash. His back surgeries fail repeatedly. He jokes about it, but his friends see how pale he gets, how carefully he sits to hide pain. And yet he keeps going. Maybe because stopping would mean facing the silence he's been running from since childhood. A quirky little detail. Kennedy once told a reporter he preferred sleeping on the floor because it hurt less than lying in a bed. Imagine that future president of the United States, stretched out on a rug, staring at the ceiling, memorizing policy notes through the haze of painkillers. Historians still debate how much of his political philosophy was shaped by that physical suffering. Some argue it made him empathetic. Others say it taught him how to endure without complaint. Either way, he's learning something that will define him forever. Control the image, no matter the cost. In Congress, he's quiet but observant. He learns when to speak, when to vanish. He votes cautiously, building a reputation for intelligence and decency. Then, in 1952, he aims higher, running for the Senate against Henry Cabot Lodge Jr., a political dynasty older than his own. It's youth versus tradition, charm versus establishment. The Kennedys pour money into ads, parades, television spots, and it works. You drift along Boston's cobblestone streets that November night, hearing cheers echo through the cold. Jack wins again. The golden boy rises another step. His father smiles for the cameras. His mother thanks God. Jack, meanwhile, probably just wants an ice pack and some morphine. Television loves him. America loves him. Reporters describe him as vital, magnetic, modern. And yet, when he speaks off script, there's a surprising sincerity, a touch of melancholy that slips through. Maybe it's the knowledge that every success comes at a physical price. In the 1950s, America is booming. Suburbs, refrigerators, cars with fins. But under the surface, the Cold War hums like a low note no one can ignore. Communism, nuclear fear, McCarthyism, it's all tightening around the edges of democracy. And here's Jack Kennedy, still learning the game, figuring out how to sound strong without sounding cruel. One quirky episode during his Senate years, Kennedy once fainted in the middle of a debate. Reporters were told it was just fatigue. In truth, he was in agony. He'd undergone back surgery that nearly killed him, followed by another one where doctors placed a metal plate in his spine. While recovering, he started writing what would become Profiles in Courage, a book about senators who stood by their convictions, even at great cost. The irony isn't lost on you. He's literally writing about moral backbone while his physical one is falling apart. Profiles in Courage wins the Pulitzer Prize in 1957. Officially, Jack's name is on the cover. Unofficially, speechwriter Ted Sorensen helps with the heavy lifting. Historians still argue how much Kennedy wrote himself, but it doesn't really matter. The message fits him perfectly. Bravery as endurance, not bluster. By now, the public image is sealed. Kennedy, the thoughtful war hero with movie star looks and a Harvard mind. The perfect candidate for a restless America craving youth. Yet, late at night, you can almost see him alone in his Georgetown apartment. Brace off, moving slowly, reading memos by the glow of a single lamp. He scratches at his hairline, jots a note, winces, smiles anyway, because to stop smiling would be to admit weakness, and that's something a Kennedy never does. The decade is changing. Polio is fading. Televisions are multiplying. And the country is about to meet the first politician who truly understands how to perform through the lens. Kennedy's war scars become invisible under a well-tailored suit. His pain becomes charisma. His fragility becomes grace. And as you drift, half asleep, through this smoky political dawn, you realize something simple but haunting. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who feel invincible. They are the ones who learn to walk through pain, perfectly balanced, smiling for the cameras. You drift now toward a ballroom, glimmering in post-war light. The year is 1951, and Jack Kennedy, thin, tanned, slightly awkward in his movements, has begun to master the role of the charming bachelor. His back still aches from his wartime injuries. He hides it behind a straight smile, a confident laugh, and the kind of teasing wit that makes everyone want to stand near him. In that circle of laughter, he meets her, Jacqueline Bouvier. You can almost see her through the haze of champagne and cigarette smoke, dark eyes that miss nothing. A smile, both shy and knowing, a voice polished by Paris and privilege. She is not like the other women who orbit political men. She listens, she measures. She seems both curious and distant, as though she's already studying this man who might one day belong to history. Their first conversations float softly horses, art, politics, Europe. She speaks French fluently. He, half flirting, half intrigued, stumbles through a few words just to make her laugh. You feel the spark not lightning, but a quiet, intellectual glow, the kind that grows in corners of long dinners and lingering looks. But beneath the charm, there is calculation on both sides. Jack is a rising congressman with his eyes on the Senate. His family is already whispering about the presidency. Jackie, though young, knows what public life costs. She has seen social ambition from up close and understands its dangers, how women disappear behind men with power. Yet she also feels the gravity of this man's destiny pulling at her curiosity. When they marry in 1953, the wedding is like a movie church, bells, flashbulbs, gowns, the Boston elite. But for Jack, every moment of celebration comes with a quiet pulse of pain. His back aches, his stomach churns, his body is breaking down under the pressure of history's gaze. And still, he smiles. As you drift through their early years, you see a strange duality take shape. In public, they are perfect, the golden couple of a new generation, handsome and photogenic in an age hungry for glamour. In private, they are distant, separated by long trips, long silences, and the loneliness that comes from being symbols rather than people. Jackie retreats into art, culture, and motherhood. Jack throws himself into politics, driven by his father's ambition and his own quiet dread of dying too young. He jokes often about death. How long will he last? How quickly life moves, but there's always a shadow behind the humor. In quiet moments, you can almost hear him whisper to her about what it means to chase greatness when you already feel fragile. Jackie listens, though she doesn't always understand. She has her own kind of armor grace, intelligence, and the ability to hide emotion behind elegance. Their home in Georgetown glows with guests, reporters, diplomats, and laughter. But when the lights go out, when the crowd leaves, both of them lie awake, staring at the ceiling to dreamers trapped inside the mythology they're building. You float through that home now. The ticking clock, the faint scent of cigarette smoke, the glow of a bedside lamp. Jackie turns a page of a French novel. Jack flips through foreign policy memos. Neither speaks. The air between them hums with unspoken thoughts, affection, fatigue, the awareness that their love is being watched by a nation that wants a fairy tale. Sometimes they find each other again and humor her, teasing him about his hair, his grin melting into genuine warmth. Other times, he disappears into long nights of work, and she into quiet solitude. But beneath it all, there is respect. They both understand the price of ambition. They both know how fleeting happiness can be when the world expects perfection. You drift with them through the 1950s campaign rallies, dinner galas, foreign trips. Everywhere they go, cameras follow. People call them America's royalty, though they both secretly dislike the term. Jack's speeches grow more confident, his health more precarious. He takes injections for his back pain, pills for his digestion, stimulants to keep his energy steady. Jackie becomes the steady calm, beside him the face of serenity, masking exhaustion. In these quiet years, they build an image that will one day become legend. The young couple, poised between love and history, walking hand in hand toward a destiny neither can fully see. You drift closer to a final evening, the glow of Washington city lights outside their window. Jackie sits by the piano, softly playing. Jack, in his chair, stares at a stack of papers. He looks tired but peaceful. For a moment, the burdens of ambition fade, and they are simply two people, imperfect, human, fragile. She turns to him and smiles, that same curious smile from their first meeting years ago. He looks up, returns it. For a second, they are not president and first lady, not icons, not symbols, just Jack and Jackie. You float backward now, away from the light, away from their quiet domestic world, toward the thunder of a campaign that waits just beyond the horizon. The nation is restless. The decade is shifting. Television has arrived, and somewhere inside Jack's tired heart, the spark of destiny begins to flare again. You drift now into the cool autumn air of 1960, where America hums with nervous anticipation. Neon lights flicker across small-town diners. Radios crackle with speeches, and television screens glow blue in living rooms across the nation. And there at the center of it, Alice Jack Kennedy. He's still the same slender man with the bright grin, but something in his eyes has changed. The calm charm has hardened into focus. Every step, every wave, every word is part of a long, sleepless march toward destiny. You float beside him as he boards small planes, shakes endless hands, and delivers speech after speech to crowds who cheer not only for him, but for what he represents: a youth, an energy, a new America that wants to move again after years of quiet caution. Behind the scenes, his team is restless and brilliant. His brother, Bobby, fiery and relentless, manages every detail with the precision of a soldier. His father, old Joe Kennedy, watches from the shadows, funding, strategizing, calculating. The family that once shaped Jack's childhood now turns its full power toward his ascent. But politics in 1960 is not what it once was. You drift through smoky newsrooms and flickering television studios. America's first truly visual election is unfolding. For the first time, charisma can be seen, not just heard. And in this new world of glowing screens, Jack Kennedy shines. Then comes the night that changes everything. The first televised presidential debate in history. You hover quietly in the studio's chill air. The lights are blinding, the cameras enormous, the tension almost holy. On one side, Richard Nixon experienced, pale, sweating under the heat, his eyes tired from weeks on the campaign trail. On the other, John F. Kennedy, confident, his suit crisp, his skin bronzed from the campaign sun. The debate begins. The voices sound even, measured. But through the screen, through the tiny black and white boxes in America's living rooms, an illusion forms. Nixon looks ill. Kennedy looks alive. You can almost feel millions of minds shifting as they watch. This, they think, is what a president looks like. It's not the words, it's the stillness, the grace, the composure. Kennedy doesn't just answer questions. He inhabits them, as though every reply is the start of a vision. He talks about courage, about the torch being passed to a new generation, about hope that sounds almost poetic. When the debate ends, radio listeners think Nixon has won. But those who watch, they've already chosen. Television has crowned its first prince. You drift with Kennedy through the weeks that follow, thousands of miles, endless applause, sleepless nights. He moves like a man half spirit, half machine, driven by faith, medication, and an unspoken fear that time is short. His back hurts, his stomach burns, but his voice stays steady, carrying words that blend idealism with command. In towns across the Midwest, he climbs onto platforms in the cold morning air, his hair tousled by wind, his breath misting as he begins again. Let's get America moving again. The crowd roars, children wave paper flags, old farmers, once skeptical, nod quietly. You feel the strange magic of persuasion a nation starting to believe in youth again. And yet, beneath the thunder of applause, there's an undercurrent of doubt. He's Catholic. No Catholic has ever been president. Whispers fill the air. Will the Pope control the White House? Can we trust him? Kennedy confronts it head-on in Houston. He stands before a hall of Protestant ministers and says quietly, firmly, that he believes in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute. The room stills. The tone is steady, respectful, and in that moment, he disarms suspicion, not with argument, but with composure. The campaign becomes a blur of motorcades, handshakes, and speeches that blur together into one great heartbeat. Jackie appears beside him sometimes, serene and poised, the nation's fascination deepening. She becomes part of the dream, the young wife with grace, speaking fluent Spanish on the campaign trail, charming voters without a word of politics. The final weeks are chaos. The polls tighten. Every vote matters. In Chicago, whispers spread of political deals and machine politics. In Boston, the Kennedys rally their loyal base. In small towns, families argue across dinner tables. Old America versus new America. Experience versus inspiration. Then comes election night. You drift through smoke-filled hotel rooms and buzzing newsrooms. The numbers flicker in from across the country. Nixon ahead, then Kennedy, then Nixon again. The night stretches into dawn. Exhaustion spreads through both campaigns like fog. And then, at last, it tips Illinois, Texas, a handful of key states. John F. Kennedy becomes the 35th President of the United States by one of the narrowest margins in American history. As the announcement spreads, you can almost hear the collective exhale of a generation. Some weep with joy, others grit their teeth in disbelief. But everyone feels that something has shifted, that America has chosen not just a man, but an era. Jack stands on a stage, his smile calm, but his eyes tired. The cheers are thunderous, almost unreal. Jackie stands beside him, glowing, composed, elegant as ever. Bobby clasps his shoulder, the brothers exchanging that wordless look they've shared since childhood, the look that means, we did it. But as you drift closer, as the noise fades into the hum of history, you see something else behind Jack's ease, flicker of unease, almost melancholy. He knows what waits for him now, the weight of promise, the cold glare of the world, the thousand forces that will soon test him. For now, though, he lets the crowd have its moment. He smiles, waves, and speaks the words of victory with quiet poise. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the pain, there's still a boy from Massachusetts who used to dream of writing books about history, now destined to become history himself. You float higher now, above the crowd, above the flashbulbs and confetti, hearing the faint echo of his campaign song fade into silence. Ahead waits a bitter winter morning in Washington. Snow, wind, and the beginning of something called Camelot. You find yourself standing in the brittle January air of Washington, D.C., 1961. The world feels frozen in a kind of hushed suspense, a sharp white morning where every breath hangs like a small ghost in the air. Snow clings to marble, the streets glint like glass, and the city trembles with the strange electricity of history being written in real time. You can see it all from above, the U.S. Capitol domed in pale sunlight, the crowd bundled in thick coats, scarves pulled tight. They come from every corner of the country just to glimpse this moment. A new president, a new decade, a new promise. And there, walking carefully up the steps, his coat collar turned high against the wind, is John Fitzgerald Kennedy. 33 million Americans will watch him that morning on their television screens. The youngest elected president in the nation is history, about to speak words that would echo across decades. The irony, of course, is that he almost didn't make it through the night. His back had stiffened in the cold. He needed his brace tightened just to stand. Painkillers again, a forced smile. Historians still argue whether he ever felt truly healthy in those years, or whether his entire public image, the jogs, the tanned skin, the easy posture, was one of the greatest performances in political history. You shift closer to him now, hovering in the chill. The podium is rimed with frost. The Chief Justice fumbles slightly with the oath card. Kennedy's breath curls in the air like steam from a locomotive. He places his hand on the Bible, his voice clear, deliberate, softer than you expect. I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear. And as he finishes the words, a cheer rises from the crowd, a roar muffled by mittens and snow and history. Now he begins to speak. You've heard the lines 1,000 times, yet in this moment they sound new, almost tender. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. You can feel the words ripple through the crowd like warmth from a fire. Men straighten, women cry quietly. Somewhere, a young boy in Kansas will remember this line for the rest of his life. But listen closer. Beneath the famous sentences, there's another layer, something quieter, more fragile. His cadence trembles slightly at times. It's not just a call to arms. It's also a plea, a reminder that the world is on the edge of both greatness and destruction. Because the Cold War shadows every syllable. The Soviet Union is building missiles. America's pride is bruised. The nuclear clock ticks. And here stands this young man, promising peace with strength, promising to bear any burden, meet any hardship in the defense of liberty. A bold promise for someone not yet to 5. The cold wind carries his words across the frozen crowd. Behind him, Robert Frost, the old poet himself, squints at his own speech, the paper too bright in the glare of the snow. So he abandons it and instead recites from memory the gift outright. His voice trembles but holds, and the symbolism, Eason T., lost on anyone, the nation's oldest poet, blessing its youngest president. You can almost smile at the quiet absurdities history hides. The microphones kept freezing that morning. The parades nearly canceled because of ice. Even the Secret Service worried his bare head would give him frostbite. But Kennedy refused to wear a hat. He wanted to look modern, photogenic, in control. It seems silly now, yet that single choice, no hat, crisp hair, open expression, helped end the tradition of presidents wearing top hats altogether. That's the strange thing about moments like this. They seem tiny at the time. Later, they ripple outward into culture, into fashion, into myth. When the speech ends, the applause feels endless. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat of America, pounding with cautious optimism. Even the skeptics, the old Washington insiders, nod quietly. They might not like him, but they know something different just walked into power, something unpredictable. Jack steps back from the podium, shaking hands, his smile flickering briefly into relief. Jackie stands nearby, a flash of ivory and fur against the snow. Her composure is flawless, her eyes luminous yet distant. She understands the theater of it all better than anyone. The staging, the grace, the calm perfection expected of a first lady before she's even moved into the White House. You drift beside them through the rest of the day, the inaugural parade winding past cheering crowds, the sound of bands and drums echoing off the cold stone buildings. Kennedy watches from the reviewing stand, clapping politely as soldiers march and high school bands stumble through frozen tunes. You can almost see him measuring everything, the weight of office settling over his shoulders, the awareness that from this moment forward, every word, every pause, every blink will be recorded, dissected, remembered. Later that night, at the inaugural ball, the chandeliers sparkle and champagne flows. Politicians laugh too loudly. Photographers snap until their flashes blur into white stars. And yet, amid all that glitter, Kennedy looks distant, thoughtful, his back aching under the tuxedo's rigid cut. He dances once or twice with Jackie, graceful but brief, then slips away to rest. Historians still argue whether that exhaustion came from pain or from realization, because once the music faded, he knew what awaited him in the morning. Briefings, crises, the unending grind of command. But for the public, the illusion held. Camelot, they would later call it a kingdom of youth and promise, built in just one snowy day. You watch the city quiet again, the guests gone, the night deepening. The snow outside the White House glows faintly under the streetlights. Somewhere inside, the new president lies awake, staring at the ceiling, already thinking of Berlin, Cuba, space, and time itself. And maybe, just maybe, wondering whether greatness is ever truly chosen or simply thrust upon those who least expect it. The world beyond the windows is silent. Washington sleeps beneath a thin blanket of frost, and in that stillness, the story turns its next page, one filled with danger, courage, and the soft ticking of clocks counting down to a crisis that could end everything. You float gently away through the cold air, as the echoes of that inaugural speech fade into history's hum, the calm before storms, only a heartbeat away. You drift now into the early 1960s, where the air itself feels heavy with quiet fear. It's not the loud kind of fear, the kind that screams or runs. It's the steady hum beneath every heartbeat, the fear that lives inside headlines and dinner table silences, the kind that makes people glance upward and imagine mushroom clouds blooming over their cities. You float over Washington again, now wrapped in the gray chill of strategy and secrecy. Inside the Oval Office, Jack Kennedy sits at his desk, shoulders squared but weary, reading intelligence reports thicker than phone books. His hand moves absently to his back, rubbing the same aching spot as always. The pain never leaves him now. It's just another background noise, like the ticking of the nuclear clock. Historians still argue whether Kennedy ever slept peacefully during those years. The documents suggest he lived in constant motion, as though slowing down might invite catastrophe. You hover near as he meets his advisors, Dean Rusk, McNamara, Bundy, names that sound like the parts of a machine. They speak in acronyms and coded language. ICBMs, NORAD, DEFCON. Each syllable hides an apocalypse. And beyond the Atlantic, another young man mirrors him, Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, pounding tables and testing boundaries. The world, somehow, has placed its fate in the hands of two men who both grew up during war and who both refuse to blink first. The stage is set. The game begins. You drift across oceans now into the streets of Berlin. The air smells of coal smoke and suspicion. Families, divided by a line of barbed wire, wave to each other from windows. East and west stare across a no man's land that used to be a city. In the summer of 1961, Kennedy faces a test. The Soviets move to seal the border, constructing what will become the Berlin Wall, literal scar across Europe. You can almost feel the helplessness in Kennedy's words when he says privately, "A wall is a hell of a lot better than a war." It's one of those sentences that sounds pragmatic but carries a strange sadness. The wall rises. The people on one side cheer. On the other, they cry. And in Washington, the young president learns what every leader eventually does, that sometimes survival looks like failure. You follow him through those tense months. The phone rings at all hours. The military wants action. The diplomats beg for patience. Kennedy listens, nods, asks sharp questions. Sometimes he makes jokes to ease the tension. Other times, he just stares out the window toward the Washington Monument, that pale obelisk slicing the horizon like a warning. And then October 1962, you can feel the shift even before it happens. A tremor runs through history's fabric. American spy planes photograph something hidden in the Cuban countryside, long, sleek shapes under camouflage nets. Soviet missiles, nuclear warheads, less than 100 miles from Florida. You hover above Kennedy as he studies the photos, jaw tightening. The room fills with the heavy breathing of men who know what this means. Not theory, not possibility. Actual weapons, capable of erasing entire cities in minutes. For 13 days, the world holds its breath. You float through those days in slow motion. The meetings blur together, the endless debates, the sharp exchanges, the pacing, the midnight calls. Outside, life continues, almost normally. School children recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Couples dance to Elvis on jukeboxes. Somewhere, a family buys a new television. None of them know how close they are to disappearing. Inside the White House, Kennedy walks a tightrope between annihilation and surrender. His generals want to bomb Cuba immediately. His diplomats warn that one misstep could trigger World War III. Historians still argue whether Kennedy's calm came from courage or exhaustion. Either way, it's what saves the planet. He chooses a blockade, a quarantine. He calls it to avoid the word war. American ships line up in the Atlantic, engines humming, ready to stop Soviet vessels carrying more missiles. The entire world watches two nuclear powers stare each other down, waiting to see who blinks first. You can almost hear the heartbeat of the planet in those moments. And then, like a sigh after a long nightmare, it breaks. Khrushchev agrees to withdraw the missiles in exchange for an American promise not to invade Kubanon secretly, to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey later. The world breathes again. That week, children go back to school. Radios play love songs. People laugh without realizing how close they came to vanishing into dust. Kennedy doesn't celebrate. He just exhales and writes a note to his brother. There's always some son of a bitch who doesn't get the word. It's half joke, half prophecy. He knows peace is temporary. It always is. You drift through the months that follow. Kennedy begins pushing for something different, to test ban treaty, a small but symbolic step away from nuclear madness. His speeches grow quieter, more reflective. He talks about peace, not as victory, but as survival. Our most basic common link, he says, is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. It is one of those moments where you feel the weight of awareness in his voice, like a man who has seen the abyss and turned back just in time. But even as he reaches for peace abroad, storms brew at home, civil rights clashes, political opposition, shadows gathering. He knows his enemies are watching. He knows the tightrope never ends. You watch him one evening, standing alone by a White House window, looking out into the soft glow of the Washington night. He looks older, now lines deeper, hair grayer. The moon hangs low over the city, a pale reminder of promises still unfulfilled. For a moment, the world seems balanced, fragile, trembling, but still intact. You drift away, the hum of the nuclear age fading beneath you like a distant thunderstorm. The crisis has passed, but its echo will never stop. Ahead lies a new horizon, one that points upward, toward the stars, toward the impossible dream he dared to give humanity. You drift now upward, past the streets of Washington, past the swirl of political storms and the hum of the Cold War, until the earth itself seems small and fragile beneath you. You follow Kennedy's gaze, turned skyward, toward the endless dark of space, toward a dream so vast it almost feels impossible. It is 1961, and the world watches a young president speak from the Oval Office, the winter sun cutting through the windows. Kennedy leans forward slightly, hands clasped, voice steady but full of wonder. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. You can almost feel the shiver of awe and doubt that ripples through the room. NASA officials exchange wary glances. Politicians frown. Scientists bite their lips. Everyone understands the audacity of what he proposes. It is bold in the way only the very young or very fearless can be, or perhaps in the way only a man who has stared down death on a burning PT boat, who has walked through constant pain, could imagine the impossible as ordinary. Historians still argue whether Kennedy truly grasped the technological enormity of this challenge, or if he simply understood the symbolic power of ambition. Either way, the effect is immediate. The United States collectively lifts its eyes to the stars. wondering if a human could really leap beyond the pale blue sky. You float beside him as he walks through NASA facilities. Engineers and technicians, once skeptical, now listen with tentative reverence. Model rockets, litter desks, charts cover walls. Calculations spiral endlessly into infinity. Kennedy's presence is electrifying, calm, yet insistent. He does not demand miracles. He inspires them. Even in the quiet moments, alone in his office, he sketches trajectories on a notepad, tracing curved paths across imagined lunar surfaces. You notice a faint smile, one that hints at both exhilaration and the faint whisper of doubt. How could one man, one nation, make this leap? Yet he refuses to entertain impossibility. You drift now over the public speeches that carry his dream to millions. He speaks of exploration, not as conquest, but as destiny. We choose to go to the moon, he says, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. You can imagine school children pressing faces to black and white televisions, imagining astronauts bouncing across lunar plains, hearts filling with possibility, and in quiet corners, his aides whisper about his health, back pain, chronic illness, Addison's disease, still there, still gnawing at him. But the moon, somehow, becomes a distraction from mortality, a symbol that even fragile men can reach for the eternal. There's a quirky detail often forgotten. Kennedy was fascinated with space food. He asked repeatedly about the taste of freeze-dried ice cream, the texture of compacted meals. He wanted to ensure that America's first moon travelers would dine comfortably, if such a thing were even possible. You can almost hear him chuckling softly at the absurdity of it, even as his eyes trace rocket schematics. And Jackie, somewhere behind him, rolls her eyes with gentle amusement. She is always a step removed from the calculations, a witness to his dreams, and a protector of the myth. You imagine her whispering reminders for him to eat, rest, perhaps even sleep, though those words are likely ignored. As the years pass, Kennedy watches the Mercury mission's launch, the rockets roaring into clouds, astronauts waving from capsules, as if to say, "We trust you, Mr. President." Each success strengthens his belief. Each near miss humbles him. He knows the moon will not wait for perfection. It will not pause for caution. To reach it, humanity must act with courage, persistence, and a touch of reckless faith. Historians still argue whether Kennedy's push for space was primarily about science, or whether it was a strategic chess move in the Cold War. You can see the duality clearly: pride and competition, hope and politics, intertwined like the spiraling paths of rockets reaching toward the stars. You drift upward again, leaving the confines of offices, of committees, of polite debates. Imagine the sky stretching infinitely, black and deep, pinpricked with stars. Kennedy dreams of a small silver orb, glowing softly, waiting for humanity's first touch. He imagines footprints left in dust that has never known life, a symbol that the impossible can be made real, that ambition is not just vanity, but legacy. Even now, after so many crises to Cold War, Cuba, Berlin, he dares to propose something beautiful, transcendent. He convinces a nation still haunted by fear to embrace hope, to invest time, money, and faith in a journey no one alive has ever attempted. You feel the weight of it as you float beside him, history itself bending beneath the courage of a single decision. And yet, there is the quiet shadow, as always. Kennedy will not live to see the moon landing. His dream will survive him, carried by engineers, astronauts, and a generation that learned to look upward because one man asked them to. You almost feel the ache in him, part longing, part acceptance. History is patient, men less so. You drift slowly, imagining the final launches of Apollo rockets, the moon's surface reflecting Earthlight. You hear the soft hum of engines, the crackle of radio transmissions, the quiet determination of those who carry forward a vision. Kennedy's voice seems to whisper through it all. Reach higher, even if you may never touch it yourself. And as you float back toward Earth, toward the streets and lights of Washington and Boston, toward the quiet of a White House bedroom, you see him alone at his desk, eyes lifted to a model of the lunar module. Pencil in hand, notes scattered around him. He sketches the future, fragile but resolute. The moon becomes not only a goal, but a metaphor, that even in the face of mortality and uncertainty, humans can stretch toward something eternal. You drift gently away, past the glow of the moon, past the imagined footsteps in lunar dust, feeling the soft pulse of hope that Kennedy planted in a nation in echo that will survive decades, long after any single life ends. You drift now into the quieter corners of the Kennedy world, the rooms behind closed doors, the corridors of the White House where cameras do not follow. Here, history softens, revealing not speeches or grand gestures, but the human fragility beneath the polished surface. Jack Kennedy, celebrated for youth, charm, and daring, carries a body that refuses to cooperate. His back pain gnaws at him daily, a reminder of PT 109 and countless injuries that never fully healed. You can almost see him pause mid-step, wincing slightly, hands reaching for a brace, a discreet pill, a whispered comfort. Historians still argue whether the public ever truly knew the extent of his physical suffering, or if the illusion of vigor was as vital as the speeches he gave. Beyond the pain, there are other shadows. He keeps diaries, notes, private thoughts that no one reads. He writes of anxieties, sleepless nights, and the quiet dread of responsibility. At dinner parties, he smiles. On camera, he jokes. Behind the curtains, he fears the fragility of life, the fragility of love, the fragility of power. And then there are the secrets, more taboo, the whispers of the corridors. Kennedy's affairs, fleeting connections, hidden in hotel rooms, in quiet corners of the world, in moments snatched between duty and desire. They exist alongside his devotion to Jackie, whose intelligence and elegance shield her from many of the harshest rumors. You float past these moments without judgment, merely noticing how a man can compartmentalize life, creating separate rooms for public perfection and private indulgence. Painkillers and stimulants are part of his daily ritual. The list is long. Medications to manage Addison's disease, drugs to ease chronic back pain, pills to keep the exhaustion at bay. Doctors come and go, quietly whispering warnings he sometimes ignores. You can almost hear him mutter under his breath, better tired and alive than rested and powerless. The private shadows extend beyond the physical. There is worry about mortality and awareness, unspoken, that the hand of history can be both gentle and cruel. Even as he plans for space, for civil rights, for the moon, he knows that life is fragile. that each morning survived is itself a small victory. Jackie, ever vigilant, senses these shadows. She glides through the public functions with a serene smile, keeping the world focused on glamour and grace. But in the quiet hours, she watches him closely, her intuition sharp. She knows when his back hurts, when a mood flickers, when exhaustion weighs heavier than usual. Sometimes she reaches for his hand, a small act of grounding amid the swirling responsibilities and secret burdens. And then there are the choices Kennedy makes in silence, the decisions not publicized, the compromises weighed carefully against conscience. You float through moments where he pauses, hesitates, almost retreats, yet always pushes forward, believing the work must continue, even when the body protests. Even humor survives in these shadows. He jokes softly to aides about the absurdities of medication, the strange rituals of diplomacy, or the tiny inconveniences of being constantly watched. You catch the faint glimmer of that mischievous grin, the one that once charmed crowds and now comforts only those closest to him. Historians still argue how much these private shadows shaped his public persona. Was the charm, the energy, the whittle of it a deliberate performance to hide suffering? Or was it the true core of a man determined to live fully despite every obstacle? You can feel the tension between myth and reality, between legend and fragile flesh, in every quiet gesture. As you float away from these private corridors, you notice the subtle rhythm of life behind the legend, whispered conversations, quiet laughter, gentle frustrations, and fleeting moments of tenderness. Even a man burdened with ambition and pain can find pockets of humanity, however fleeting. And in that awareness, you begin to understand a central truth. Greatness often casts long shadows, and sometimes the most profound stories exist not in public triumph, but in the silent battles waged behind the closed doors of history. You drift back to the glow of the White House exterior, the city quieting beneath a soft winter sky, carrying with you the sense of fragility, resilience, and the invisible struggles that shaped a man the world would come to call iconic. You drift now into the quieter, weightier rooms of power, where words are measured and consequences can be lethal without a shot fired. The year is 1963. Washington hums with ambition, tension, and the low, persistent murmur of a country wrestling with itself. You can feel it, the unease that stretches from the streets of Birmingham to the corridors of the White House, like a faint static in the air. John F. Kennedy sits behind his polished desk, pen in hand, reading letters from Americans whose lives are changing, whose courage often goes unseen. African American families write of threats, beatings, and the simple desire to register to vote. Children write of schools that won't admit them, of buses they cannot ride without humiliation. You can almost feel the paper's texture, the ink smudged from tears or shaking hands. The president leans back in his chair. His eyes, always aware, now seem to carry a particular wet mixture of personal empathy, political calculation, and moral pressure. Historians still argue whether Kennedy's civil rights actions came more from conscience or concern for legacy. Either way, the man who once walked the halls of Harvard with his privileged peers now feels the pull of a broader, more urgent justice. You drift with him through tense cabinet meetings. Advisors speak in clipped tones about political risk, about Southern senators and upcoming elections. Yet Kennedy.com, but firm, insists, progress cannot wait for convenience. He knows courage is often measured by timing, and the time, he decides, is now. There is a curious little scene in the background, almost whimsical. A lunch with aides where Kennedy playfully compares the stubbornness of segregationists to a stubborn mule in a snowstorm. It earns a quiet chuckle. Even amid tension, humor persists. It's one of those tiny human moments that remind you that even great men live in the ordinary. You glide now to Birmingham, Alabama, though you are not present physically. You can feel the heat of the streets, the weight of tear gas, the cries of children and mothers protesting peacefully. Kennedy watches television coverage from the Oval Office, sipping a glass of scotch he rarely touches in public. He frowns, he makes notes, he calls local officials. His voice is calm, but beneath it hums an urgency that cannot be televised. Jackie sits nearby, elegant as ever, offering counsel and comfort. They speak quietly, the public never knowing the depth of their shared concern. You sense that she understands, perhaps better than anyone, the dual nature of his burden, the need to act and the need to survive the political consequences of action. In the summer of 1963, he delivers a nationally televised address. You drift close, sensing the careful deliberation in every phrase. He speaks of equality, of justice, of the moral obligation of the nation to fulfill its founding promises. His cadence is deliberate, almost hypnotic, designed to reach beyond political loyalty into the conscience of every American. You can feel the tension in the room, even as you float in the narrative. Southern legislators seek Northern allies cheer quietly. Ordinary citizens across the nation lean toward their screens, some fearful, some inspired, some both. And then there are the private shadows letters from children beaten for attending integrated schools. Telegrams from ministers pleading for action. Reports of violence that never make the headlines. Kennedy reads them all, carrying them in his mind like invisible weight. It is exhausting, and yet he moves forward. Historians still argue how much risk he truly assumed, how much of the civil rights push was calculated politics versus personal conviction. What you notice as you drift is that the distinction may not matter. Actions speak louder than debates. And in this period, Kennedy's actions begin to shift a nation's consciousness. Slowly, incrementally, with deliberate care, you glide to the quieter, more intimate moments. Kennedy meets with civil rights leaders, shaking hands, listening intently, taking notes. He smiles gently, encouraging, never condescending. You can almost hear him whisper softly in private, "Change is possible if we dare to do it right." And yet, there's always the tension of fear, the tension of legacy. He knows that the country could turn against him at any moment, that political allies could desert him, that history might judge him harshly. Still, he persists, choosing conscience over convenience, morality over calculation, knowing that courage often costs more than comfort. As the summer heats up, the stories of courage and violence, of protest and repression intertwine. You drift alongside Kennedy in these moments, feeling the emotional gravity of each decision. The quiet determination of the man is palpable. You notice the care in his gestures, the attention in his speech, the weight of responsibility pressing steadily but never breaking him. The public sees the charm, the smiles, the iconic rhetoric, the hope. You see the shadows beneath, sleepless nights, moral wrestling, quiet acts of vigilance, and the painstaking, sometimes agonizing, orchestration of change. And in this reflective stillness, you begin to understand a pattern that will recur in Kennedy's life: the interplay between brilliance and vulnerability, between ambition and conscience, between history witnessed and history shaped. He moves through it all like a tightrope walker above a storm, steady, aware, and somehow graceful. You drift slowly away from the Oval Office, past Washington's frozen streets, past quiet neighborhoods where people are living lives both mundane and extraordinary, feeling the echo of Kennedy's conscience. Here, in these shadowed moments, the human side of history is revealed: a man, fragile and brilliant, choosing courage despite the fear, readying himself for challenges still unimaginable. You drift now into the days, weeks, and months after Dallas, a period where time itself seems to slow and stretch. The nation is stunned, suspended in a strange limbo between disbelief and mourning. Street corners, once ordinary, now carry the weight of memory. Photographs, frozen in sunlight or shadow, become symbols. You feel the quiet tension of a world suddenly aware that history can change in a heartbeat. Jackie Kennedy moves with grace through the storm of grief, her presence a silent shield. You can almost hear her soft instructions to staff, her careful guidance of what the world sees. She preserves the image of Camelot, knowing that the world needs something tangible, something hopeful, even as everything has been appended. Historians still argue how much of the Kennedy myth was shaped consciously by her hand, and how much emerged organically from collective longing. You float beside the mourners, lining the streets for the funeral procession, their faces pale and solemn, scarves fluttering in the wind. You notice ordinary acts of human devotion: a woman clutching a child, an elderly man bowing his head, a student laying a small bouquet of flowers near a barricade. These are the quiet echoes of loss, gestures that speak louder than words. The media sweeps across the nation like a river, carrying images and words into homes. Black and white footage of the motorcade, the flag-draped coffin, the silent riders in the hearse imprint themselves onto collective memory. You can almost hear the muted clicking of cameras, the whispered commentary, the low murmur of voices in living rooms. Every home becomes a witness, every television a confessional for grief. And in the midst of it, Kennedy's legacy begins to crystallize. Speeches are reread, letters revisited, actions recast in a new light. The man who once faced missiles, illness, and political storms is now viewed through the prism of absence. His charisma, his courage, even the quirks and private shadows you observed earlier, all contribute to a narrative larger than life itself. Historians still argue how much of Camelot was reality and how much was constructed posthumously. Yet, as you float above the scenes of mourning, you feel the interplay between myth and fact, how the world sometimes needs legend to make sense of tragedy. Kennedy becomes both the man and the symbol, inseparable from the collective imagination. You drift past public memorials and small personal rituals, candles lit in windows, letters sent to the White House, children drawing pictures of a smiling president. Even in these tiny, intimate acts, the story continues to grow, fed by remembrance, nostalgia, and a yearning for what was lost. And yet, there are darker currents beneath the surface. Conspiracy theories begin to ripple through the public consciousness, whispers of bullets, shadows, and betrayal. You sense the tension between truth and speculation, between mourning and suspicion, shaping the way the world remembers. Historians still argue about the influence of these narratives, about how they intertwine with the myth-making to create the Kennedy legend we know today. You float above Camelot itself, the idealized vision of a presidency marked by elegance, ambition, and hope. It is a construct, yes, but one born from real moments, the televised debates, the bold speeches, the daring vision of the moon. You can almost hear Kennedy's quiet laughter in the background, a reminder that even myth is rooted in human choice and action. And in this reflective calm, you see the duality, Kennedy as man, Kennedy as legend, the charm, the intelligence, the audacity, and the private shadows all merge to form a story that endures, whispered in history books, echoed in documentaries, felt in quiet bedrooms like this one. You drift past the years that follow Johnson's presidency, the marches, the space missions, the political ripples that Kennedy's choices set in motion. Camelot survives, a memory and a guidepost, a fragile reminder that even a life cut short can influence generations. And as the soft light of memory fades, you sense that the story is still alive, breathing quietly in the hearts of those who remember, who reflect, who dream. The man, the myth, the tragedy, and the hope Paul entwined like shadows and sunlight through a stained glass window. You drift now beyond grief, beyond the immediate echo of Dallas, into decades shaped by the quiet resonance of Kennedy's life and ambitions. The streets of Washington, Boston, and even Houston feel different, imbued with the afterglow of ideas and ideals that one man briefly embodied. You notice how his presence lingers, like sunlight after the clouds have moved on, touching corners both familiar and unexpected. Space missions continue, rockets slicing through the sky. Guided by engineers and astronauts carrying the torch Kennedy first held aloft. You can almost hear the distant roar of engines as Apollo 11 lifts off in 1969. The words "we choose to go to the moon" echoing faintly across time. Historians still argue how directly Kennedy's vision influenced the pace of America's space program, but the trajectory is undeniable. The moon, once a dream, becomes a reality. Footprints in dust-proof that ambition endures, even beyond the life that sparked it. You drift through classrooms, children learning of a young president who dared to speak boldly to the nation. Posters on walls, textbooks, and whispered lessons all carry fragments of Camelot, a smiling face, an eloquent speech, an impossible dream realized. Even pop culture absorbs him. Films, television specials, and novels resurrect him constantly, blending myth with memory. You notice that some portrayals soften the pain, some highlight the charm, others dramatize the tragedy, but all keep him alive in imagination. And somewhere quietly, Jackie Kennedy shapes legacy too, preserving documents, photographs, letters, and artifacts. Museums begin to form, archives open, public memory curated carefully, consciously. You can almost hear her soft sighs, her satisfaction that the story is preserved with dignity, the charm and tragedy held in delicate balance. Political influence flows in subtle ways. Senators, representatives, and presidents themselves cite Kennedy as inspiration, the eloquence, the courage, the drive for justice and exploration. Civil rights legislation, space programs, diplomatic negotiations threads of his vision continue to weave through American life. Historians still argue how much Kennedy's presence haunts political discourse, how his youthful idealism informs policy decades later. You float over pop culture to the iconic photographs of Jackie and John, the small gestures frozen in time, a wave, a glance, a hand on a shoulder. Camelot becomes shorthand, a symbol for optimism, for possibility, for leadership tinged with charisma. People continue to reference it, not only to remember a president, but to evoke the feeling of what might have been, of dreams interrupted, yet still luminous. And there's the quieter side, Kennedy's name in public buildings, schools, and parks, a physical reminder that ambition, intellect, and vision can transcend mortality. Children playing on playgrounds, students studying under banners, citizens passing plaques. They experience history subtly, almost unconsciously, yet the influence is real. You drift into the subtle echoes in international relations. Leaders across continents reference Kennedy's speeches, his calls for peace and understanding, his measured responses during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Even decades later, his words are taught, repeated, dissected, and debated. You can almost hear diplomats quoting him softly in quiet offices, remembering that a single voice once balanced fear and hope on a global scale. Historians still argue the extent of Kennedy's influence on subsequent presidents. Some say his charisma and tragedy create a lens through which all leaders are judged. Others suggest that his youthful ambition left a blueprint for vision tempered by personal fragility. Either way, the pulse of his life moves quietly, invisibly, shaping ideas, expectations, and cultural memory. Even everyday life carries traces. Families discuss history at dinner, referencing his speeches, his vision for civil rights, his daring dreams for space. Newspapers and documentaries revisit his life yearly, anniversaries, bringing brief but vivid recollections of his persona. The collective consciousness, you realize, is a tapestry threaded with his actions, his dreams, and the shadows he left behind. And then there are the subtle, almost whimsical echoes. People curious about presidential habits, lovers of trivia recalling his fascination with speedboats, with reading, with history itself. You can almost hear someone, somewhere, whispering, he loved a good joke, even with the weight of the world on his shoulders. It humanizes him, keeps him tethered to reality, even as myth grows around him. You drift now past decades of echoes, first moon landing, the Vietnam debates, political movements, social change, cultural shifts. In all of it, Kennedy's presence lingers, sometimes gently, sometimes prominently, always shaping memory, aspiration, and the way people imagine what a leader can be. And in this soft, reflective glide, you notice the symmetry of influence. Ambition meets tragedy, action meets myth, hope meets reflection. The legacy is not static. It moves with time, bending to interpretation, but always carrying the original spark, a man who dared to dream, who embodied brilliance and vulnerability, who shaped moments both ordinary and extraordinary. As you float gently back toward the quiet of a bedroom or a study late at night, you feel the pulse of history continuing, a soft hum of possibility. Kennedy's life, though brief, moves through decades like a subtle current, touching, shaping, inspiring, reminding. The past is alive, and so too is the vision he cast across time. You drift now into reflection, settling into the quiet spaces where history, myth, and mortality converge. Kennedy's life unfolds before you, not as a series of headlines, speeches, or debates, but as a fragile, luminous story, threaded with brilliance and vulnerability alike. You feel the weight of possibility, the way one life, brief and brilliant, can tilt the perception of a nation, a culture, even a century. From the glittering beginnings, through war, illness, triumphs, and failures, Kennedy's story is punctuated by contrasts, charm and cunning, courage and frailty, public grandeur and private shadows. You sense that the tragedy is not merely in the violent interruption of his life, but in the awareness of how ephemeral greatness can be, how fleeting time is even for those who seem destined to shape the world. Historians still argue whether his legend owes more to deeds or to the poignancy of their abrupt ending. You float back to the PT 109 nights, the hurried White House meetings, the speeches that inspired millions, and the moments he spent quietly, alone, managing pain, ambition, and expectation. Every choice, every smile, every act of courage now feels simultaneously monumental and humanly vulnerable. The brilliance of his mind is inseparable from the fragility of his body, the magnetism of his persona inseparable from the private doubts and fears that shadowed him, and the tragedies ripple outward. Dallas, that single, unthinkable day, crystallizes history in sharp relief. You can almost feel the collective intake of breath, the suspended disbelief, the hush that fell across a nation suddenly aware that no individual, however brilliant, is immune to fate. You notice to the ripple effects, Jackie's grief, the careful curation of Camelot, the birth of conspiracy theories, and the way generations learn to view his life through the lens of what might have been. Yet, in tragedy, there is also resonance. Kennedy's vision for the moon, for civil rights, for a bolder, more ambitious America, continues, quietly shaping decades. You drift past rocket launches, legislative milestones, classrooms, public speeches, a faint echo of the ideals he nurtured. It is a reminder that greatness, though fragile, leaves marks that endure beyond the span of a single life. Private shadows persist, too: pain, medication, hidden illnesses, quiet moral dilemmas were companions he carried even as the world saw only charisma and action. You can almost hear the whispered regrets, the late-night reflections, the soft laughter that broke through worry. He lived, as we all do, with contradictions, brilliance entwined with human limitation, courage entangled with fear, ambition paired with the awareness of mortality. There is something almost cinematic in this duality, a tension that draws you in. The public remembers the speeches, the space missions, the televised charm. The private remembers the pills, the back pain, the fleeting moments of tenderness with Jackie, the quiet satisfaction of a vision realized, even partially. You drift along both memories simultaneously, sensing that Kennedy's greatness is inseparable from his mortality. Historians still argue whether Camelot is myth or history, whether the poignancy of his death inflates the significance of his achievements. Yet the interplay is what endures. A man who dared to inspire, who dared to act, who dared to dream beyond the bounds of ordinary expectation, and who reminds the world that brilliance is never untouched by fragility. You float now past the years of echoing influence, the moon landing, civil rights progress, political debates, cultural shifts. Everywhere, traces of his ideals appears, sometimes subtle, sometimes unmistakable. They are like the footprints on lunar dust he never saw himself, marks of aspiration that endure beyond the physical life that inspired them. And finally, you drift into the most intimate space, the recognition that tragic greatness is not merely about death, accident, or misfortune. It is about the tension between potential and limitation, the ache of ambition pressed against the constraints of life, the fleeting brilliance that commands attention precisely because it is not eternal. You feel the quiet resonance of his story, a reminder that human aspiration is both luminous and fragile. As you settle into the gentle hum of memory, you sense that Kennedy's story whispers still. It speaks of audacity, of brilliance, of charm, of struggle, of courage, and of the inevitability of human vulnerability. It teaches that greatness is not the absence of pain, nor the guarantee of survival, but the courage to act, to dream, and to leave a mark, however brief, on the world. You drift slowly toward calm, the hum of the night softening around you. The streets, the cities, the classrooms, and the quiet bedrooms of America are all carrying fragments of the story, preserved in memory, echoed in reflection, softened in the gentle lens of time. The tragedy is palpable, but so too is the beauty, the audacity to live fully, to inspire, to dream, even knowing that life is fleeting. And in that final, quiet space, you rest with the thought that even in brevity, brilliance persists, that even in shadow, light lingers, and that the story of John F. Kennedy, tragic and luminous, continues to whisper its lessons across generations. Now, let your body sink deeper into the mattress or the chair you're resting in, feeling the gentle hum of the night around you. The story softens, the echoes of history fading into calm reflection. You may notice the subtle rise and fall of your breath, the way your eyelids feel heavier, how your mind drifts over the delicate interplay of ambition, fragility, and courage. Even the great luminous figures like Kennedy were human first. Their brilliance was intertwined with doubt, their triumphs shadowed by vulnerability. You can imagine that gentle, reflective rhythm now, the quiet moments of thought, of whispered conversations, of longing for what might have been. There is no rush here, no urgency, only the soft cadence of memory and reflection. You might picture the moon again, the silent footprints, the bright stars stretching endlessly above, and recognize that greatness often exists in quiet influence rather than spectacle. The whispers of history, the small acts of courage, the moments of tenderness, they linger in the night, subtle and persistent, just like your own thoughts drifting softly toward sleep. Let the tension of tragedy and triumph dissolve into calm. The world feels still, history tucked gently into your imagination, and the pulse of possibility softens into quiet reassurance. Even in loss, there is beauty. Even in imperfection, there is inspiration. You drift further, carrying with you the gentle lessons of courage, hope, and human fragility, settling fully into the comforting embrace of night. Sweet dreams, as the story fades into soft shadows and the hum of your surroundings, leaving the world for now and resting in the quiet, eternal whispers of history. Good night, sweet dreams.